I've been getting several questions recently about how many literary agents you should query if your goal is to get your book traditionally published. So I want to address that in today's video. It is a really valid and smart question because as an aspiring author, you want to know how many tries to give it before ultimately reconsidering your publishing options, and no one wants to waste their time. Sometimes authors that I work with come to me saying they're disappointed because all of the literary agents that they have reached out to have rejected them or not responded, to which my response is always, well, how many did you query so far? Because ultimately, the querying process really is a numbers game. I know how frustrating it can be. I know how daunting, overwhelming, and disheartening it can be, but it is a numbers game at the end of the day. So today I'm going to cover how many agents there are in the industry, my tips for how to approach the numbers game, and giving you an idea of how many queries is normal to send, and talk through some things you can do if you feel like you have run out of literary agents to query. And spoiler alert, you have not run out of agents yet, I promise. If you are anywhere along the book writing or publishing journey, I recommend subscribing to my channel. Every week, I either post a video with publishing insights like this one, or I talk about tactical tips for strengthening your manuscript, and I would love to have you around for all of that. So first, to contextualize this question of how many agents should you query, we have to talk about how many agents actually are there in the industry actively working right now. So the place that I always cite for this information is a website called Query Tracker. In the US especially, it is the most widely used literary agent database used by both agents and authors who are querying. So I really recommend checking it out if you haven't already. Currently, Query Tracker has more than 1,700 listings for literary agents, and that includes mostly agents in the US, but also in the UK and elsewhere. However, that does not mean that your target number should be anywhere near 1,700 agents. That would be insane. Also, you shouldn't be querying any agent that crosses your path. You should be very picky and deliberate with choosing which agents you want to query. First, you need to make sure that the agent is actively open to submissions from authors. More and more agents these days are doing open periods where they are accepting queries, likely when their client work has subsided and they have a bit more time to review queries. And then they are doing closed periods when they are not actually accepting new queries. So you always want to check the agent's website as well as check Query Tracker because they do have a way to filter for agents who are open to queries. So always make sure that that agent is currently accepting queries before reaching out to them. Some agents will just remain open to queries always. So just make sure you do your research on that front. Secondly, you only want to query literary agents who represent your genre and specifically list your genre as something they are interested in. If you don't do that research or you are not in one of their target genres, it is likely just going to be an instant rejection and you don't want to waste that query. And third, this is really important. Typically, you can only query one literary agent per literary agency. So that means among, the 1,700 literary agents, there are only a certain number of agencies, I would guess several hundred. So you want to make sure you pick the agent from the agency who is the best match for your project. Agencies come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. There are literary agencies that are just one person, as well as large literary agencies that have dozens of agents. So if you're interested in learning more about how agencies are structured, check out my video on the different types of literary agencies. So now that you have a sense of how many agents are out there and what your main broad criteria are going to be for narrowing down your list of potential agents, how many agents should you target for querying? Let me start by saying there is no one right answer for how many agents you should query, and if anyone gives you a specific number, they are just misinformed. The hard truth is, no matter how many queries you send out, no matter how many agents you reach out to, there is still no guarantee of getting representation or getting your book published through a literary agent. Some authors will query one agent, and that first agent will offer them representation and it will just work out beautifully. Other authors will query over 100 agents and ultimately never get an offer of representation. That is just how the publishing industry works. It is all about finding that perfect agent match, which often requires a lot of time and a little bit of luck as well. So with all of that in mind, there is no hard data on how many agents on average you should query to get an offer of representation. Most of the documented resources are just from authors who are open and willing to share their number of queries, which is really, really helpful to people who find themselves in the querying process. So from these anecdotes from authors who have shared their statistics, as well as my own knowledge from working in the publishing industry, typically authors will query a few dozen literary agents before getting an offer of representation. So I would consider an average range to be anywhere between 30 to 70 queries, which I know can sound like a lot. And especially if you are personalizing each query letter to an agent, it will take some time and effort. If you have reached the point of querying 100 agents and you have received no positive responses, meaning no one has requested to review the entire manuscript, at that point, I would take a step back and reconsider either your query letter approach or the manuscript itself, or ideally both. If you are in the position of querying a few dozen literary agents and you have received some requests for the full manuscript, I want you to know that that is extremely encouraging and you should definitely keep going. It is a very good sign that the sample pages that you included with your query and your pitch in your query letter are intriguing agents, and it could just be the case that the agents who requested the full manuscript didn't totally connect with the story as it progressed, and that is totally fine. Keep in mind that it is relatively rare to receive a request for a full or partial manuscript. When I was working at a literary agency and primarily responsible for reviewing queries from authors and requesting manuscripts that sounded promising, over the course of about 2 years, I only requested a handful of queries, even though I reviewed hundreds and hundreds of them. So if you are getting those requests, it is promising. If you are getting a lot of requests for the manuscript and they are all turning into rejections, it might be the case that you want to work with someone on the manuscript to make sure it's really delivering on the promise that you set out in the sample pages and in the query letter. But I do want you to keep your head up because it does mean that there's something there. If you are having trouble interpreting the different responses that you might get from literary agents, or you're curious about how literary agents respond to queries, check out my video where I go through all of the potential agent responses and explain what they mean. So what should you do if you feel like you're in the situation where you have run out of agents to query, you've done your research, you've sent out a few dozen queries, and now you are kind of unsure where to go from here? One option, if you are based in the US and you have been focusing on US agents, is to query UK and or Canadian agents, especially if you personally have a connection to that country and or your story has appeal in that market. In fact, I recently had an author who was based in the US and whose story actually also took place in the US sign with a UK agent just because they meshed really, really well professionally. So you can definitely consider that option, and that will broaden the number of agents that you can reach out to. Keep in mind that the UK, Canada, and US publishing industries are extremely interconnected, so you will still be able to get a good book deal no matter if your agent is based in any of those places. On the flip side, if you are based in the UK or Canada, then definitely consider US agents because they can also represent you, especially in the US market. Another option to broaden your agent list is to query junior level agents. They are often looking to build up their client list. They often have fewer submissions from aspiring authors and therefore can give your query and ultimately your manuscript more time and attention. And so that's definitely worth looking into. And lastly, keep your eyes on the hashtag MSWL on Twitter. Many agents are very active on Twitter, and when they are looking for a specific type of story, they will describe it and then use the hashtag MSWL, which stands for manuscript wishlist, to let people know that they are open to receiving queries that fall in line with that description. Also, agents will typically post on Twitter when they are reopening their query inbox, so that's a really good place to search for that as well. And it may be the case that you find someone whose manuscript wish list perfectly aligns with your project. So just, once a month or once every 6 months, whenever you're kind of rethinking your querying strategy, throw in a search for MSWL and see if any agents come up. I hope these tips help you feel more confident and optimistic about your querying approach. I know how hard it can be, and that's why I want to keep bringing you resources that help you stay encouraged and help you understand how the industry works. Let me know in the comments if you are currently on the querying journey, and if you are, feel free to let me know how many queries you have sent out. As I said, I think it's really important for us to be transparent in the industry because that only helps each other out and helps everyone understand how their publishing path might turn out. If you are in the position of receiving rejections from literary agents, I recommend checking out my video on what to do if you can't get a literary agent. I go through some tactical strategies for what you might do next with your manuscript if your dream is still to get traditionally published. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. It helps me know I'm bringing you content that is helpful and allows me to continue growing this community. Thanks so much for watching, and happy querying.